Welcome to Keeping It Young podcast, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I'm Dave.
And I'm Bethlie.
And we are the Youngs.
Welcome.
Hey, thanks everybody for joining us again this week, and hope you've been enjoying this series about conflict resolution between parents and teenagers. And this today, as far as we can tell, is going to be the final one in the specific parents and teens.
Yes.
And I hope you'll join us next week as we'll start talking about conflict resolution in the blended families.
Yes.
And many of you that listen to us, you have maybe a stepson or stepdaughter, and certainly you're dealing with a divorce situation and custody situations, and all of those put a different level of conflict resolution in our teens' lives.
Yes, well, they just bring different issues that you would not have in just the nuclear
Absolutely.
family.
And so we're going to be talking about those, and then we'll have one session coming up about parents and adult children and how to resolve conflicts in those situations as well.
And then the conflict will be over.
Amen.
Sounded like a quote from a Tolkien book.
It did, didn't it? Hey, I think there's a couple of more spaces still available for the Couples Prayer Advance, and so that's in Pigeon Forge, October 13, 14, 15. If you can't make it on the 13th, you can easily join us on the 14th and step right in. That'll be no problem at all if you just want to come for Friday, Saturday. But the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Thursday's a bonus day, and we would be delighted and thrilled and happy if some of you yet were to join us. So
we would love to see you. We want to look out and see your smiling faces. We want to meet new people who say, hey, we listened to your podcast and we've never met you before. We love to meet. Even if you cannot come to the Couples Prayer Advance, which, sorry, Brother Harold, I even said that because we would love to see you at the Couples Prayer Advance. But if you can't, check out our schedule online at evangelistdaveyoung.com, and we would love to meet you somewhere along the way as we're doing revival meetings and family conferences.
If we're in your area, we would love for you to join us for a service or two, and that would be a great delight to us. And just keep that in mind. Check out the Keeping It Young. I hope a lot of you went on our social media last week and checked out our baby Ellie Joy.
Yes.
And our granddaughter. We're so very thankful for her, and she's just growing well and doing well, and we're thankful for that.
Yes, and isn't she beautiful? And if you don't think so, I don't want to hear it.
Well, there would be no way.
But she is beautiful. There's no way you could not think that she's adorable.
No way. She is adorable. There's just no way around it. Well, let's jump in here and finish the conflict resolution between parents and teens. And today, maybe a little bit of crossover here again, so we're kind of summing things up. But we wanted to just take some time to give you some help in solving specific disagreements between you and a teenager. And so we have 8 helps. 8 helps in solving specific disagreements with you and your teenager.
Right.
All right?
Not meaning that we're naming what the disagreement will be, because only you know what that is with your teen. But these are the helps in solving that.
Just some advice. And we're going to move quickly. So if you are listening to us today, listen quickly and write quickly if you're taking notes, and we'll move right along. So here's number 1. You've got to remember that you're on the same team. Don't ever forget that.
Right.
Don't ever come to the place where you feel like your teenager and is just a different planet and they no longer care. Teenagers may not always show it.
Right.
They may not. In fact, there's a huge difference from our little one, our children, when they are 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10, and they're so warm and cuddly and happy, and then all of a sudden
excited to see you.
all of a sudden those hormones come along, and depending on what there's different. Our children are different. The pressures our kids get when they go to a public school, the pressures they get when they go to a Christian school, and even the uniqueness of a homeschool.
Yes.
Our children can all be at different places in how they were responding to things and what's going on in their heart and in their emotions and in their mind.
Yes.
But just don't ever forget that you're on the same team. And if you're a teenager listening, I want to remind you that in your family, you're on the same team.
Right.
You may not always understand why is dad that way, or why is mom that way, or why didn't dad do like this, or why did he respond like that? Don't ever forget that we're on the same team.
Yes, and one of the ways that we have been able to do this with our teens is to remind them, even if we have to have those hard conversations, we remind them, you know what? I am for you. And I love you. I love you more than anyone else in this world. And I will love you no matter what. So just remember that. Remember that I am for you and I love you. And that always does help because our kids always just nod. I know, Mom.
I know.
But at least they know we're all on the same team.
Yes. And so here's number 2. Clearly define the problem, issue, and the facts through, here's a key word, listening. Clearly define the problem, issue, and the facts through listening. And this involves several things. You've got to develop a habit when you have a conflict issue in a family, especially between a parent and a teen. You develop this habit of asking and listening and repeating. Asking, listening, and repeating. A book I just recently read called the method they follow in their family. They came up with this situation in their family. He's a psychologist, so he's a little more maybe more detailed than we would have been. But one of the things he said was they called it drive-through discussion.
Right. And what was the name of the book?
This would have been the DNA.
I know you referred to it before.
The DNA of parent-teen relationships.
Yes, by Dr. Smalley and Smalley.
And his son Smalley. So, but what he talked was that they described it to their children in the sense of going through a drive-through. When you go through a drive-through, the person on the other end of the microphone says, "How can I help you?" And you share your order.
Right.
A person who's on the other side should be listening to your order, and then they repeat it back to you.
Yes.
They say, "Did you say a Big Mac with no onions?" And you may say, no, I said a quarter pounder with no onions. Okay,
Right.
I got that. So you said a quarter pounder with no onions. And so he said that give and take of, if you're having a discussion with a person at the drive-thru and you say, "Well, I would like to have a quarter pounder," and they go, "Are you serious? You want a quarter pounder?"
Why?
What kind of an idiot are you? You're going to, but that's how often, he said, we tend to respond to conflict.
And see, I'm sitting over here on the other side of the room and I'm thinking, why are we using McDonald's drive-thru? Why aren't we using Chick-fil-A drive-thru as an illustration?
She's more spiritual than I am.
No, I'm getting all hung up on the McDonald's illustration instead of the point of the illustration.
So
Sorry.
as you're going through the Chick-fil-A drive-thru
and ordering your Cobb salad with grilled chicken.
There you go. Then and Bethlie would say without corn.
Yes.
And so the repeat back. So what he did by that is he laid it out. And what I caught from it was this. When there's a conflict in the family, you schedule the time to go through the drive-thru. You schedule the time. All right, we have to talk.
Yes.
And then there's this matter of asking, listening, repeating. You say, okay, now son, there's something wrong. I know it, you know it. Now I'm not going to say a word. I want you to tell me exactly what's in your heart, and I'm going to listen. And when you're done, I'm going to repeat, and you tell me if I'm understanding the problem.
Right.
And for some reason, our culture, we're busy, so we try to rush a discussion. And so we jump in the middle of it. I got that, and here's what you do about it. And that often happens in a marriage too.
Yes.
But with our teenagers, when we jump in and they're trying to tell us something, it shuts down the conversation.
Absolutely. And we can be so quick to do this. I think as parents, I can be quick to do this. My child starts to tell me something. Sometimes it's not even an issue in their own life. Maybe they're just sharing something from a college buddy or whatever. And I'm just quick to jump in and be like, "What? You're kidding me. Why would they do that? Why would their parents let them do that?" And I just totally shut down the conversation. But when it comes to issues with your children, this is such a great method to think of it as that drive-through. I want to hear everything that you need to tell me, and I'm going to even make sure that I have in my heart what you just told me. I'm going to repeat it to you.
And remember, the key word here is listening.
Yes.
And so you say, okay, tell me your perspective, and you listen till the end. And when they are done, you say, now here's what I'm hearing, and you repeat what you heard. At that point, they may say, "No, that's not what I meant," or they may say, "That is exactly what I meant." Then at that point, and this is something you have to communicate and train your kids to do, at that point you say, "Okay, now I'm going to share mine. Let me share my perspective," and you listen. And if somewhere along the way somebody jumps in, you say, "Now wait a minute, I'm not finished making my order yet." I haven't yet told you I don't want corn on my Cobb salad. And so you repeat it, you repeat it, you repeat it. And what you're doing is you're trying, the key word here is you're listening so that you can understand what is going on in the heart of my teen.
Right.
And a teenager then, by listening, can understand what is going on in the heart of my parent. Sometimes a conflict can be solved with simple understanding.
Right.
When I go, okay, I see where you're coming from, and that makes sense.
Right.
And sometimes all we need is to be valued, for someone to say, I see your perspective.
Right.
I'm okay with your perspective. And I don't see it that way, but I'm okay with your perspective, and I will honor your perspective.
Yes.
That can solve so many
Well, it
issues.
doesn't just help your teen. It helps you as a parent because, like I said, sometimes we just jump in, or David said that too, we jump in before we know the whole issue. And sometimes if you've heard the whole thing, then you know that there's not really an issue at all. What you thought maybe was a bad attitude is actually your child's not feeling well and coming down with something. They have a headache, or maybe they had a really bad day at work. You can be a little more aware. You can be a little more concerned instead of ready to jump on them and correct the problem.
And that's absolutely correct. And you may find out in the listening that there's, you start picking up on something. There's something else going on here.
Right.
Our kids, there's a hurt in their life somewhere, and it may be that somebody at school said something to them and really damaged their spirit or whatever. And so that second position there, that second point, is so vital. Clearly
Vitally
define
important.
the issue and the facts through listening. And the third one is kind of a continuation of it, and almost a repeat in other words, but it is so important. So number 3, what are some helps in solving specific disagreements? You gather all the facts you can. Gather all the facts you can. This prevents us from being impulsive.
Right.
When we respond impulsively, you parents have been on the receiving end of a teen responding impulsively. When a teen just shuts you down and won't listen, when a teen is so fast to jump in and react, it frustrates you, it annoys you, it makes you feel that they don't love you or that they don't value you.
Right.
But our teens feel the same way when we do that to them.
Yes.
And so we gather all the facts that we can. And if the issue is big enough, moms and dads, maybe you need to write all the facts down. Writing things down allows your mind to process on a different level what was said verbally.
Right.
And so if it's something you can just communicate it verbally and be done with it, do it. But if you've got a big enough problem, gather the facts and write them down.
Yes.
Anything you'd add to that?
I would just say, while you're just listening, like we said in point number 2, clearly listen and gather all the facts. David said something just a few moments ago about your team may share a hurt that you didn't know that they had. Well, that is a huge red flag to you that some of their behavior has a root difficulty. And so then you do need to gather facts. You need to say, oh, hold on just a second. Could we back up a little bit? Could you tell me a little more about that situation? And again, you don't want to react. You don't want to, sometimes David will say to me, he'll say, don't freak out. So, and I hear that voice in my heart sometimes when I'm listening to my kids, because they will share a hurt or something with me. And I think, what? How did that happen? When did that happen? And how did I not know? So just be calm and then gather all the facts that you need so that you can not only address maybe what the behavioral issue was, but we can then address this hurt.
And we don't want to ever come across as saying that, we're some kind of cold, sterile machine to where we're like, we do not react to our children. It's not some robotic kind of thing.
I think they all know that I am a reactionary. Okay, go ahead.
How would they know that?
Well, I couldn't even get through the McDonald's illustration. Okay, go ahead.
That's so true. So what you're doing is you're gathering facts.
Yes.
And this can be in a loving, gentle, happy, this can be during a meal, this can be sitting on their bed, this can be sitting in a living room, this can be driving in a car.
Right.
You're gathering facts. Let's move number 4 down a little bit and jump to number 5. Create a pro versus con list to help create solutions. What are the pros and the cons? And when you got a specific disagreement, what you do is you make a list and let your teen make a list too.
Right.
So, okay, here's the disagreement, and here's what we could do about it. Here are all the ways. Make a pro list, make a con list, make a positive list, a negative list, a preference list, a what I don't prefer list. go ahead and make lists and take the time. You don't have to solve a problem instantaneously. Maybe you need to take a day, or maybe it's 3 days. And say, you write. I want you to write some things down, and I'll write some things down, and then you come together and you swap lists. You say to your teenager, "Here's Mom's list. Read it over and tell me what you think. Here's Dad's list.
Right.
Here's your mom and dad's list." And it's very worthwhile to come to a teenager and say, here's a disagreement we're having, and what I want you to write down is, what could we do about it, and what are your options, and all you're trying to do in this kind of list is make options.
Right.
And it's just a simple way. If you've got an issue, feel free to write it down, make a list.
It might surprise you that what your teen will come up with as a solution, because you're thinking of them still as a little child who cannot think through a problem solving, and probably you're also thinking, well, they're going to want to go ahead and do whatever this issue is that I don't want them to do, or they're going to want to behave in this way. And it may be after talking about it and you being open enough to listen to their side of it, when they write out their solution or come to you with their solution verbally, you may be surprised that it's a really good solution, and you may be able to agree on it.
Because remember that the point of conflict is not that we're trying to avoid them. We're trying to respond to them in a healthy way.
Right, and to solve them.
And we're also trying to use conflict to help us to grow in the Lord.
True.
So that God uses the conflict of this sin-cursed world to grow us, to mature us. We learn how to handle them. We learn about ourselves and why we are the way we are.
Right.
And so part of what you're doing here is by defining problems, by listening to each other, by making a list and gathering all the facts. What you're doing is you're trying to find a way to take a conflict and to make it a positive thing,
right.
a point of solve where we resolve it. So it's a resolution, but it's also a point of growth to where we're growing.
Yes.
And sometimes as Bethlie and I have worked through things in our marriage that have been conflicts or even potential conflicts, once we figure out how to solve them and understand them, then the next time the conflict comes along, there's already an understanding.
Right.
And sometimes it even resolves future conflicts because we still have, issues where we don't see eye to eye or we don't understand something going on in each other's heart. But the fact of the matter is, because we've developed a healthy way to handle the conflict in the previous conflicts,
right.
It helps us down the road to handle the ones coming yet our way.
And the same thing with your teen. And also that growth, you will be amazed how much growth will come from your teen when these conflicts are handled in such a healthy way, instead of the shutting them down, or instead of the argument, instead of yelling at each other, instead of isolating yourself from each other. There is a lot of growth, not only in the maturity of your teen, but in your relationship.
Sure. So here's a couple of the things we tell you then. And the next one is this: agree on one or more of the solutions. And it might be you need to, choose two of the solutions and work them, but often you can boil it down. If you make a list, if you've got a conflict that's big enough to make a list about it, then read your teen's options,
right.
Read mom's options, read dad's options, evaluate them, and then all of you agree on this is the best solution.
Right.
And ultimately, moms and dads, you're the final authority in these situations. But sometimes it's good to, maybe you look at the teenager's list and you think, that one right there, I wouldn't have chosen that one because that's gonna be an ongoing. But maybe you look at it and you think, what, it might be good for our son to have to work through that. He hasn't really thought that completely through, but it will let him grow through that, or she will really have to.
Right.
That's just a really big one.
Or maybe you could do a combination. You could both compromise just a little bit and say, well, hey, how about if we do this from my list and this from your list, and we'll put it together?
Absolutely. So here's three more things then. The next one is this: write down the agreement. Once you've come to an agreement, if it's something to where you have a really healthy relationship with a teenager and you can just verbalize it and it's over and you move on, so be it. But some of you may have a family situation to where things are just ongoing and there's conflict and there's tension and it just doesn't seem to go away.
Right.
Well, then as you start handling these conflicts, as you ask and you listen and you write them down and you evaluate them and you agree on a solution, one of the things that might be good for you to do is just write down the agreement. Just simply put it down on paper,
right,
and then sign your names to it. And maybe put it on the, in a file, or put it on the the children's bedroom wall on their door. And just, here's the agreement we've agreed on. And often agreements are time matter.
Right.
Like, so here's a ramification. It's going to be for a week. So let's sign our name to it that we're going to do this for a week. Or it may be, this is how we're going to handle this in the future. And we just write down. And so the next time it comes up, we can say, here's our agreement.
Right.
And the thing about agreements is they can be changed. The nice thing about, even legal matters is that you can sign your name, but then you can go to court, you can go to a lawyer, you can take a will that is a very legally binding agreement, and you can change it, and you can add something to it and sign a new date and a new signature.
Right.
So it doesn't mean everything is cold, hard facts where you have one option and it's over. But you write down the agreement. And then here's two other things in the time that we have. Number 7, deal with the anger once the conflict has ended.
Yes.
Sometimes conflict resolution has a matter of anger, and when the conflict is ended, make sure that you resolve completely any anger issues in the heart.
Right. Ask for forgiveness. As a parent, it is totally appropriate if you have said something out of anger or angst or irritation and you have hurt your child, you need to ask for forgiveness.
Sure. And so you deal with anger. Now, here's the last thing we would tell you. And that would be simply this. There are times you need help.
Yes.
So make sure you pray.
Yes.
And make sure you seek wise counsel. This is the last one. In conflict resolution, pray, pray, pray. God's word tells us very clearly that if any man lacks wisdom and he asks of God, that God will give it to us liberally.
Yes.
The Authorized Version says, and he upbraideth, he will upbraideth us not.
Yes.
The idea is that God's not going to be bothered that you ask for wisdom. He knows you need it.
Yes.
He has it. He's given us his word. He's given us his church. He's given us his Holy Spirit. And so make sure you're praying about conflicts and you're saying, okay, God, give me wisdom, give my son wisdom.
Right. Maybe
pray together. And maybe one of the things you could do is ask your kid to pray when you're sitting down to discuss something, say, let's just all take a moment and pray for wisdom as we work our way through this. And then Dad, you pray, and Mom, you pray, and then you have your child pray. And each of you pray. Sometimes in the middle of a conflict, it's hard to pray because our spirit is just so bent out of shape.
Right.
But taking the time to say, okay, God, and God already knows. It's not like we can't be honest with God and say, Lord, I am so frustrated. And I always just love how David will just say things like that. I'm just so mad at my enemies. And he just says it in his praying.
Right.
And God recorded that for us to let us know that he works in the realm of reality.
And we can be honest.
So we start there. But then we seek wise counsel. In our lives, there are at least 3 areas especially where we've often gone for counsel. One was to our parents.
Yes.
So there's been times where we've just said, hey, we're dealing with this situation. What do you think we ought to do? Bethlie's dad was our pastor for 18 years of our marriage. And many, many times we went to our pastor/dad and just said, what would you do? And sometimes when you're sharing something in just a normal story with your parents, they will offer counsel and just say, well, you could do this. And you didn't solicit it, but my goodness, that makes sense. So you seek wise counsel. We've, in our marriage, we've frequently turned to our friend, Dr. Dave Tice, and to our pastor friend, John Ray.
Right.
And they've always been men that I could just give a quick call to. And I think we have time to just tell this brief story. When our son was in college, he had a little issue in which he and his girlfriend were not necessarily honoring the rules. It wasn't anything the end of the world they were doing, but just a couple of times they got in a little bit of trouble because they were getting too close in their relationship and they were breaking some college rules. And nothing that ever got them kicked out of college or, would separate them from being in ministry. Just they broke our personal family rule in a few areas and the college rule.
Right.
And one of the things that happened in the midst of that was, I was just, how do we handle this? Do we, bring down an iron fist and say, all right, you're done, you're breaking up or whatever. But neither her parents or us felt like that was God's plan. We felt like our kids, this is who God wants our son to marry. And her parents felt like, no, this is who God wants our daughter to marry. So we were all on the same page about that, but still there was this little issue. And that would have been during his sophomore year. So these are young. Our kids are young. They're sophomores in college, 2 more years to go and 5 semesters to go or whatever. And so I remember calling both of these friends of mine, Dr. Tice and Dr. Ray, and I just said, hey, to Dr. Tice, here's what's going on. And what I'm looking for is, how would you respond to this, and how would you correct this?
Right.
And he said, probably they're in love, and it's God's will for them to be married, and her parents think it's God's will, so why don't you just let them get married? And we were a little dumbfounded. I was like, seriously? He's a sophomore in college, and he has 5 semesters left. And I remember Dr. Tice said, so? Are you afraid he's going to have to work hard to finish his degree? Life's hard. Sometimes you work hard, you work long hours, and you pay bills. And so I was like, I need a second opinion on that. And so I called Dr. Ray, and his opinion was the same. Mm-hmm. Well, he said, you know what? The Bible is very clear. In years gone by, young men his age would have already been married and maybe even had a son or daughter on the way. And I know our culture is different, and I get that.
Yeah.
But the point they made helped us, because then we were able to say to them, it's obvious you guys are in love, and you've got to be wiser. You've got to honor the rules. Mm-hmm. You're in a Christian Bible college. You're going to honor the rules. Honor the rules. Honor your mom and dad's rules. So we had a big talk about that, but we said, you know what? It's time for you to start planning a wedding.
Yeah.
And so they were, at this point, the only kids of ours that got married while they were still college students. Right. And does that have hard things to it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Mm-hmm. But that advice we received helped us to solve a conflict that we did not know how to handle. So,
yes.
Any further thoughts?
I would say, when you're looking for advice, make sure you go for godly, sound, practical advice. I know we live in a technological age, and it's so easy to Google something or to look for the latest podcast. This one's a good one. If you're going to look for a podcast, you could go to the Keeping It Young podcast. But make sure that you are looking for a biblically based sound biblical wisdom. You don't want to go to, well, I know this couple in our church has teenagers. Well, just because they have teenagers doesn't mean that they're doing a good job with their teenagers. So observe the situation a little bit and make sure that you're going to someone who doesn't have perfect teenagers, because obviously you already know that we don't have perfect teenagers and we aren't perfect parents, but go to someone who is striving to raise their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord and striving to have godly children. And that would be a great place to look for advice.
And one of the keys to knowing that it's good advice is when someone says, well, here's what the Bible says.
Yes.
And they direct you to God's truth.
They do.
That's a good way to evaluate it. Well, thank you so much for joining us over these last few weeks as we've talked about conflict resolution in marriage, toddlers, children, and now teens.
Yes.
And I sure hope you've enjoyed the sessions and that you've learned from them, that you'll put into practice what you're learning, that you'll like them and share them with others if they've been a help to you.
Yes.
In coming weeks here, one of the things we're working on is we're compiling a new set of questions, and we're going to be doing a podcast with question and answers.
Yes.
And so if you'd like to shoot us a message with any questions you have, then we will be addressing those here in a couple of weeks.
Yes.
On the Keeping It Young podcast. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for joining us today, and hope you have a great week ahead and that you will serve the Lord with gladness.
The Keeping It Young podcast is a Bax 5 Media production.